So yes, this is our team, and we are, of course, ETL developers and SQL developers. Yes, true. But because we're a platform, yes, we're analysts, but we're also software administrators because we look for, install, and maintain our software, which means we're system administrators. We work with the infrastructure people, and then we manage our production environment. We're also programmers because automation and these abstracted software tools that we have only take you so far at times, and you kind of have to fill in the tools with code. But we don't like to code, and we'll get into that in a moment. We're database administrators because we manage our production environment in the data warehouse, and we work with the data warehouse owner. I'm sorry, the Redshift owner, which is a data warehouse. And we're operational. We take care of, once we develop, we take care of our schedule, our jobs. We're on call for these jobs. So we try to make SLA every day. And we're good peeps. So we're going to go through these kind of fast. This is from another presentation, but there's a few things I kind of liked in here that we can go over. But this is essentially the cycle of our requests, how you would request data from to go in the data warehouse. But what I liked about this, some of these slides were showing the sources, right? We get data from databases, all sorts of databases. Lately, those are kind of waning, and now we're getting things from sources like S3, SFTP, kind of old technology, but still out there humming. If we can avoid using SFTP, we like to, but it's a way. APIs are really what's humming out there. A lot of stuff has gotten to via APIs, and the data warehouse is a source too for enrichment, right? If you don't know what solution you would have, you would consult with us and then put in a ServiceNow ticket. And this is one I'm going to go through quickly. That's a ServiceNow ticket. And this is what we do. Once we get the ticket, we find out if we have an existing solution or if we have to develop a new one. And we do this other stuff too. These are the tools that we're using in our platform. Notice the data stage is X'd out. That's because this is what we are migrating off of. That was more of an ASU hosted service that we dealt with. We wanted to go to a SaaS solution, which is Snaplogic. These are the different types of designs we do. We're not going to get too much into those, just so you know, and awareness. This is how we load our tables. Destructively, we wipe everything out, take everything from the source, and replace it, right? Sometimes too big. Can't get them all at once because it would take about 12 hours to load, right? So then we do the incrementals, and there's different types of designs we use for that. And then there's historical. That's for data that we keep in case you have retention on your source, we would keep it for you. And this is just a migration process. Like everyone else, development, QA, production, and so on, enterprise workflow. This is what Control M looks like. This is our workflow manager. And those are what jobs look like. You see they have a successor dependency relationship, but that's not what this presentation's about. So we'll just bypass all this on call, and we handle automation and notification. All right, got all that out of the way. So now you know who we are and what we do. Now, before we get to the Snaplogic demonstration, we're going to go over some design principles that we follow. It's very important that we keep things simple. When I was a kid, a young developer, I thought it was really cool to develop and code things that was really complicated. I could say, wow, look how smart I was. And then a year later, I look at it and wonder what the heck I did. And as you get older, you get wiser. And so we do things simple, but without compromising functionality. That's very important. It must be the same functionality. We like things to be consistent, especially when you're managing your own jobs and you're getting up at 2 in the morning to fix something. You don't want to have to refigure it out. So having things consistent helps in managing a whole bunch of jobs. And by the way, we run about 2,900 to 3,000 jobs a night. We want things to be reusable. That's one of the reasons why we got Snaplogic, so that if we develop something once, we only have to develop once and we can control it via parameters, right? And big time here. And if I had to switch that, it would be no code as a preference. We don't want to program. We just want to get our service done. We want to get that data into the data warehouse as fast as we can in a way that's as stable as we can, but we can do it with no code. That's great. If we have to code, it would be low code. And the ETL, ELT. They're both ways of processing data. It just depends on where the transform is happening, right? So ETL prepares the data while it's in flight, and the ELT is when it's after the data is in the data warehouse, and that is the most efficient, right? Because now you're using the database's cycles, and it moves a lot faster that way. But there's proper instances where you would want to use ETL, and we're going to show you some of that. So here's the cycle, right? We read from the source. That's pretty obvious. But we read from the source. We process the data, ETL. We write to S3, something new that I'm going to talk about, right? And then we write to Redshift. That's our database. And that's where the ELT begins, all right? Writing to S3, kind of important, kind of a detail, but we write in the traditional way. You would read from a source database and you'd write directly to your data warehouse. Those are typically transactional databases, and that was fine. Redshift is not like that. Redshift is super fast, and it works really well with large data, big queries, right? And writing to it directly isn't the most efficient. In fact, it's rather slow. It likes to have data read from S3. So we read from the source, write to S3. Does anyone not know what S3? Does everyone know what S3 is? Yes. Okay, good. That's, if you don't know, that's a type of storage in AWS, and is available to read from all sorts of AWS services. At any rate, we write to S3, and then we use the bulk copy to ingest that data into Redshift. It's very fast. We can load millions of rows in seconds. Another benefit is that when we write that data out, it'll be in the data lake in most instances, and that makes it available to you if you want to get to that raw data. Two birds with one stone. Okay, so now getting to Snaplogic. When we talk about Snaplogic, we talk about pipelines. Everything's a pipeline, right? And they're all hierarchical. There's different types of pipelines. There's standalone pipelines, workflow pipelines, meaning that that's more of an orchestrator that calls child pipelines. There's child pipelines, which could also call child pipelines. And there's reusable pipelines, big for us, right? And you'll see why in a moment. Now I'm going to get a little technical here. Does everyone know JSON pretty much? Oh, good. So Snaplogic uses JSON-like documents to transfer data throughout its pipeline. That makes it really nice for us and really flexible for the processing. The enterprise data warehouse also uses JSON files to ingest data into Redshift. We could use CSV, but CSV is very problematic. For instance, like if you have a carriage return and it breaks up a line, right? But Redshift, I'm sorry, with JSON, it's more well-formed. Something that's kind of interesting, when we ingest the JSON files in Redshift, it likes to have it in a certain format. It's a set of objects, otherwise known as JSON lines. It's not within an array. They're just objects that are standalone objects. Each one identifies a line a lot like a CSV. We're going to see that just in a second, because I was kind of prepared for someone who may not understand JSON very well. The JSON keys must match the columns. If they don't, we have to map it, and order doesn't matter. So here's an array of objects. And what we want to do, each of these two guys right here is a row, right? Name and type. And then when we format that for Redshift with Snaplogic, we create these JSON lines. And now you can see each one is a separate object that has all the data elements in it. In this case, if we read that directly into Redshift, there would be a column called name and a column called type. So here's a teaser. This is what you would call a workflow pipeline. This is like an orchestrator. This return, the blue thing up there, don't worry about that. That has more to do with running things in batch. What we're looking at are the light blue diamonds. And those, with the exception of this one, I don't know why they decided to make that one the same color as the pipeline execs, but they did. But these, actually I have that animated, these called child pipelines. And it documents itself, right? We know this one's calling a pipeline that does a source to work table. This one does a duplicate key check, because we always want to make sure the data is in good quality, has good quality. We're checking if there's dupes. If there isn't, sorry, if there is, then we're going to abort the job. If there isn't, we're going to move on to our, in this case, destructive load, and then we're going to drop our work table. So let's take a look at the child process. So this is the source to work. In this case, we're reading a Salesforce table. We're going to get into what the prep and the copy to work child pipelines look like in a moment. And we're reading the Salesforce SOCL in this case, and then doing some transformations, which will be ETL. And then we're doing that JSON formatter to create those lines. And by the way, these looks that you see here are consistent, very consistent. When we look at the pipelines and the demonstration, you'll see they look very familiar. Oh, we're getting through that fast. That's good. So Snaplogic is what's called an iPaaS type of software. It's a platform as a service, an integration platform as a service. So what is a platform? But different technologies, right, that make up the application of the service. This is what it looks like. So when we log in for our demonstration, we're going to be logging into our PC. Sorry, we're going to be using our PC to then log into what's called the control plane. I know it's a bit detailed, but it'll make sense in a moment. Again, we're setting up the context. The two squares you see in the middle, those are called plexes. There's one that's called the cloud plex, the one on the top. That is something that Snaplogic that's infrastructure that they could have for you, so you didn't have to have that burden. And then you would be able to read cloud services like Salesforce, Workday, and so on. But we read, we use a ground plex, and we read, oh my gosh, did I hit the wrong button? There we go. We read local sources, Oracle, on-prem, HU hosted sources, right? So we need to have that other one. So this is what it looks like. Just thought I'd give you some insight with that. And that control plane we log into, that's where all our assets are. When we log in, that's where we are. And that has all of our pipelines. There's 3 panels. There's a designer, which has your snaps and your canvas, where you do your work, a manager, where you manage your assets, and your dashboard, where you can monitor your pipelines or the health of the software. So all that was just to give you some context to what we're going to be doing. I don't believe it. I did really good. Okay, so that's good because it gives us time with this demonstration, and we can even do more if you want. Okay, so we're going to do 3 demonstrations. We're going to do a real basic one because we're going to keep it simple so that we can illustrate exactly what we want to do. Then we're going to do a more complex one. EOS was kind enough to let me use one of their pipelines. I kind of liked it because it's interesting. And then, I mean, we're doing AI stuff, right? So I'm going to use a little AI there. All right, so first, read from the database. So let's see. First, okay, now it's all going to come together, right? So first, we're going to log into the correct. And it's a SaaS application, so it takes a little bit of time. All right. By the way, these are all the snaps that you see on the side. These are your tools. On the left side is your canvas. That's where you're going to do your work. So for instance, if I wanted to do, let me see if I can choose one here. I should just know what to do. Let's say I wanted to do some Postgres SQL. How am I going to do this? There we go. What's that? I need a pond. I do, but that would be nerdy. What's that? There you go. You are. What I want to do is scroll down here and show you these to give you a concept of what these tools are. And now remember also that Snaplogic is an integration tool. Although the data warehouse is a form of integration, it's not going from like an application to application, right? we're going from a source we're only reading. We're not writing to any other source. We're only writing to the data warehouse. So we're doing sort of a subset. So when you look at some of these snaps, you're going to see things like insert in a PostgreSQL. We're not doing that. We're not writing to somebody else's PostgreSQL database. But there's all these different functions you can do. You can see how it abstracts those functions, so you don't have to code them. I'm trying to get. Oops. I have a mouse actually. That might not be a bad idea. These are the ELT functions. So if we want to do ELT, that's what we can use. So that's that, right? So now let's look at a pipeline. In our environment, and I'm going to go into our dev environment. We wouldn't want to mess around with production. Come on, you. Come on. There we go. I'm going to go down to a project. These are projects. We separate our sources by project. So this one, for instance, is eAdvisor. And you can see that we have 3 pipelines, right? We have this first one, starts with UTL. That is a standalone pipeline. We use that to check the health of the database. So before we read it, we kind of ping it. And that's what that guy does. In fact, if you want to see that one, I didn't plan on that, but sure, there it is. Again, ignore that blue one on top. That's all we have to do. We bring this guy in, and then we do probably a dual. Oh, select dummy from dual. There you go. If we get an okay, we know the database is available. Very easy. I mean, that is super easy, right? I'm going to try to do this. Let's see. I don't want you to have to do that. That seems like it's quite tiring. That's true. Okay, so now the workflow. Tell me, does that look familiar? In fact, most, if not all, our pipelines look like this in some shape or form. Now, you always have exceptions, right? But for the most part, that's what they look like. So this is orchestrating our source. In this case, it's an Oracle database. But if I cursor over, there's a child pipeline. So we open up the child pipeline, and it calls another child pipeline, right? In this case, these are all shared. So this one for the prep, again, remember, it's all going to come together now. So when I say this, you're going to know exactly what I mean. So since we write to S3, we're deleting all the S3 files in that path to prepare for this load. And then we have a work table because we're not going to write directly to your target until it passes muster, right? It has, and we have to make sure it has good data, that it doesn't have duplicates. Once it passes muster, then it can move on in the workflow. But right now, we're creating an empty work table. If it's there, we delete it, and then we recreate it. And that, if you notice, the name of it, share. All of our pipelines use this. They all use the same pipeline. It's really cool. So now that's the prep. And what I'm going to do is show you how this works. This is called a validation, and it's going to read a swatch of data, and we'll be able to look at it. I'm looking up here expecting it to be different. Okay, so these are what's called documents within Snaplogic. These documents are that JSON we talked about. So for instance, if I should display this one, now what did we do there but some SQL to create a table, right? And the S3 stuff. And what this tells us is that the result was success. And it also shows us what we did. But what's even more interesting is that in this JSON, these are data elements. If I want to take this SQL statement right here, or this message, and pass it on down the pipeline, I could. That's really powerful. And the really fun one here, right? Keep in mind that this, if you notice, there's 2 pipelines here, right? The workflow and the child pipeline. All the shared pipelines are in another project, right? A shared project. You don't see them right now. What makes this reusable are these parameters. All we have to do is change these values to our source and target tables, and it changes the job, right? Now it's going after a different table. So with these 2 pipelines, we can load 1 to 1,000 tables if we wanted to. So in other words, what that means to us in the data warehouse is if you should, in this particular case, for this database, you requested a new table. All we would have to do, and this is really cool because it hasn't been like this. All we'd have to do is create the table according to the metadata in the source, put in the parameters, and we're done. That's literally about 15 minutes worth of work. Okay, so back to the child pipeline. All right, now, so here's the source, and sure enough, everything's parameterized, right? So there's a source schema and table name, and it reads that, and voila. Here's the data in JSON, by the way. And I can expand that and look at it. But now look, the format it's in, again, it's all going to come together here. That is an array of objects. See the commas after the each object? We want to turn that into JSON lines. So now, without coding, mind you, and it's a lot of work, honestly, we just have to check that box. Yeah, you guys took me really seriously. It's not a lot of work. And then we can look at a facsimile of that. And you can see now they're all in JSON lines, all set to write to S3 and ingest into Redshift. And let's take a look at that. So now it would pass, right? If it didn't fail, this guy would finish. He'd pass it on to this one, which checks for duplicates. If there's dupes, then he'll exit. Otherwise, he moves on to destructive load and then drop. All those right across, except for the middle one, which is a router, those are all reusable pipelines where they're in one place in a shared project, and all of our jobs just use the same thing. Very, very efficient. I thought if maybe I'm kind of adding on to my presentation here, but that's okay. And if I go down rabbit holes, you can stop me. This is a rather interesting one for those of you who are technically inclined. This is a snap that gets metadata from our database. And from there, we can get everything we want to know about that table. I don't know if it actually has a count, but it does tell us all the columns, what's a primary key, and so on. And from there, we can assemble different variables. If I were to run this, I'm not sure which one it has here, but let's just go ahead and run a validate on that. It's going to see. Oh, it's going after. Where's Patrick? Oops. Did he leave? Oh, well, we're going after Workday. A Workday table that we have. And if we look at this. Yep, see, it has everything we want to know about that table. What we want to know about the table. Now, you may want to know something else like a count of a number of rows. And unfortunately, it doesn't tell us that. But from here, we can get all the rows, all the columns, and whether something's a primary key. And that is what we do. We also use it to build where clauses. And then here's the logic to get the primary keys, to see if there is a primary key at all. If there's not, then move on. If there is, check for dupes and move on. And back to the workflow. And then here we're checking for the dupes. This is just saying, are there dupes? Nope. Go on. If there are dupes, then you move down here. I've already said that 3 times. And then the destructive load, once again, this is a shared pipeline. It gets more interesting, by the way. A shared pipeline, and notice ELT, right? Now we're in the data warehouse, so now we don't have to do any ETL. We're doing ELT. We've already loaded it. Now we're doing the transformations. Although there's no transformations here, they're just doing literally an insert into one table, from one table to the other. Again, I'm going to really annoy you guys. A shared pipeline, right? And that's really huge with us because what we can reuse makes our development really efficient. Okay, so that is the first scenario. Sorry, I'm doing this one hand. I'm used to using a mouse, not a, let's see, here we go. Assistant. Lovely assistant. Thank you. All right, so there's going to go down to another project called Handshake. Where are you? HI, right up here. Come on. There we go. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Not every request we get is as easy as reading an object from a database and writing it to data warehouse with no transformations. In fact, that's kind of rare, actually. So we have obstacles we have to get over. So in this particular case, we had some customers that have a report, comes from an application, a SaaS application called Handshake. They have a reporting facility that they can schedule in Handshake, and it writes to anywhere you want. In this case, they're writing to S3, right? So we can read it. So it's in JSON format, which is really nice, and it has a timestamp, which is nice, because then that means we can go after a specific date, and if the file is not there, wasn't delivered, then we can fail our job and or notify the stakeholder that the report's missing. But there's more. We have to get the current file, but what if we want to go after a specific date? Let's say, oh my gosh, no, that last data was no good. Can you load yesterday's again? Well, if we had it coded in there or set up so that it was only go after the specific date, we say, oh, well, we have to recode our job, and we don't want to do that. So it needs to be simple and flexible. We need to get the latest file if there's two files. We get both those files, we're going to have duplicates, right? Because, by the way, the files are the complete data set. Sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes the report fails. And when it fails, it has this one JSON element called logger error. Okay. And it has unconventional data element names. So we told them, I'm sorry, we can't do this. No, I didn't do that. We took it on just fine because we had the tool. By the way, notice that these aren't reusable because of those unconventional key names, right? We had to map them. So these are all unique. They use the same exact design, but they each have a mapper that is specific to that file. But notice that the workflow is reusable. So all we do in the workflow is pass the name of the pipeline that we want to call. Whoop, come on, you. There we go, right here. That's our low code. Not very codey, right? But it's low code. Again, looks familiar, but something's different, right? We'll get to that in a moment. We're going to look at that pipeline first. And I can't really mouse over this anymore because now it's a variable. So what is grab one? We'll grab events. So this looks a little bit busier, right? One of the, I'd say when I show people Snaplogic, one of the paradigms they have to go through is that not every function is all inclusive. And what I mean by that is if you want to get a file, there's really not, it just depends on the scenario. I really shouldn't say that. We need to get a file, and you could get the file from the S3 Snap, but we don't know what the file is called, right? So we need to find out what that file is called. So we're going to use an S3 browser. So you know what the prep is already. So you're pros on that one. So the S3 browser, again, we're using parameters that are being brought down from the workflow. And we're going to, and those are filled in here. We know where the bucket is. We know the prefix. And here's where the date is, right? The way we have this set up is if the date is blank, go after today's date. But if you fill in a date here, then it will go after the specific date. If we had time, I'd show you the code for that. It's actually pretty cool, and maybe I will. So now I'm going to run the validate so we can actually see what this is doing. That's kind of cool. And it may not be cool, but I'm easily amused. So right now it's reading, it's doing all the operations in this with just a swatch of data. So it actually read S3. And in this case, I have hard coded in this one a date of 10/17 because I knew that there were 2 reports for that. I wanted to show you that. So when we look at what's output here, you can see there's 2 lines, there's 2 files. If I expand that, you can see 2 files. One is, can you read that? Can you guys read it? Do you want me to make it bigger? There, better? We want the one that's 544, 1744 versus 1509, right? You have to shrink it for me. I need to get to that. There we go. So then, after we read this, we pass that document, which has both those files listed, right? And we use this tail function. And if anybody, Linux people, tail, what does tail mean? So what you do is start from the bottom and work your way up X number of documents. We're going to go after the last row, which is going to be that one file that we want because it's sorted by time. Now, when we look at this guy, he's going to read that one file. And we're not going to be able to actually see that file. But I just want to show you that there's one file. There you go. Look at the JSON and expand that guy. And I'll make it bigger here. And there it is, the one for 5 o'clock. Now we have just one file to deal with. Remember, we didn't know what the name of the file was because there's a time, there's a data, or is there a time? Yeah, there's a time in there. We don't know when the time that was written. So how can we go after that? And if we use a wildcard, which we are, we're going to end up with more than one file. So we needed to get that specific file. Again, with no code. Where's my control? There it is. Let's see. All right. Now we're reading the file. This little diamond here means that it's a binary. So we really can't click on this. If we did click on it, it would give us some information about a binary file, right? Let me put that in JSON. Expand and make it a little bigger here. So you can see how big it is. Some other stuff that we're not really interested in. So there we go. One other thing that I wanted to mention, by the way, is that notice that when we tail the last file, sorry, it's taking, if I was using a mouse, it'd be faster. If we look at these, again, remember I mentioned that before, these are now data elements with data. We have this path with the full path. We can use that. So we're passing that. Oh, gosh, I wish I could do this faster because it would be so more dramatic. Let's see. Come on, come on. There we go. Can you see that? About $path. We didn't have to code it. We just put the variable that's being passed from a prior snap, right? Now we have the file and we've read the file, and believe it or not, I believe that if we wanted to, where is that? Okay, I'm not going to do that. At any rate, so now remember this is JSON and it's in binary. So now we need to kind of convert that JSON to a document that we can read. And in this particular case, this JSON parser can do some cool stuff. If you add some structure to it, you can put the entity, you know, or the path that you wanted to follow. And we're going to be doing that in our last demonstration. And now we actually have data. And there it is. In tabular format, but that's the data. At the same time, I won't show you it in JSON. And now we're going to check for the looker error. We got the file, we got the data from S3, we got the latest one, we've converted it to JSON, that we can read. And now we want to know, is this an actual report or does it have an error? And in this case, we're using a router. We're just saying get. We're using JavaScript here. Get that element. Does it exist? No. Then move on if it does. Then we're going to bypass all this stuff right here. See on the bottom, these two guys connect. If it's not there, then we have real data. Remember we had the unconventional column names? Now we have to map them. That's why these aren't, that's why these have to be mapped, right? The column names in our table don't exactly match the names that are over here. And plus we're not going to have column names that have dots in them anyway, because that's not conventional. By the way, notice on the bottom, it gives you what the data looks like on both sides of the transform. It's kind of cool. Now that we have them mapped, we can look at the data in its actual form that we're going to have when we write it out. Voila. Now everything is agnostic, right? It's like any other data. You pass it on to the JSON formatter to make it line JSON, copy it to the work table. You guys have seen that because you're experts now. In this case, we're going to union it because now we're going to go back to the workflow that doesn't quite look like the other workflows. And we're going to say, by the way, because remember, if there was a looker error, we were bypassing all this and coming up. Now we're telling the workflow, did you see a looker error? Because if you did, go down here. And by the way, don't abort the job because we know, and we've have the agreement with our stakeholder that if you get that, just bypass it for that night. Nobody needs to know. Nothing to see here. So we do that. And then we don't have to go through all this, but duplicate key check. Are there dupes? There we do abort it. Destructive load, drop the work table, blah. Looks really familiar, doesn't it? Okay. Wow, we're getting close, aren't we? Okay, the last 10 minutes is pads. All right, so the last one is, yes, because we're doing AI stuff, we're going to use AI to build a pipeline. And no, this doesn't replace us because it's not that good. But they have this feature called Snap GPT. Very clever. Snap GPT, because it's Snaplogic, blah, blah, blah. All right, so we click on that. And let's say that we're feeling particularly lazy. I'm going to try to expand this. I guess I can. We're feeling particularly lazy, and we wanted to generate a pipeline for us, right? You can also analyze a pipeline, describe a pipeline. Describing a pipeline, we're going to show you that because you may want to do documentation, right? You can also have contextual skills. We use JavaScript. That's a native language within Snaplogic. It's very simple. You can have it give you expressions. You can have it write expressions if you describe it well enough, right? So we're going to generate a pipeline. In this case, it says, and we're going to take the default, but you can type anything you want in here. This says, if you can read it, if I expand it, it's going to go away. I'll read it to you. It says, generate a pipeline to get the exchange rate from a European central bank and write it to a JSON file. Okay, so let's have it give us some examples of what it would do. So now it's thinking. I think I could expand this. Yeah, there we go. Lovely assistant, I'm going to need you in a moment. So now it's given us 3 examples. It's saying, okay, I don't know exactly what you want, but this is the 3 that I think that I can build for you. So we're going to go after the rest get. That's a little sexier than the rest. So we're going to grab that guy. I'm going to replace the current pipe. Nope, I'm not going to replace the current pipeline. Let me do that again. Import on new tab. And we're going to just give it a name here. So I have another one there. Save. All right, so now it just put that pipeline on our canvas as soon as it's done thinking. Any moment now. Oh, there we go. Overwrite, no problem. All right. Can y'all see that? There we go. A little bigger. All right. You know what? I'm gonna kind of be, oh, come on. There we go. I'm gonna kind of be OCD here. I don't like that open part of it, so just don't pay attention to the man behind the curtain here. I'm gonna get rid of that. Boink. That just means that you're feeding something into it, and that's not what we're doing here. All right. So I wish I could make this bigger. Can I make it bigger? Come on, there you go. Maybe one more. One more. Should I go for it? There we go. Okay, good. Hey, look at that. It did a validate. So it actually has data. How did that happen? I mean, we didn't do anything. This is what it gave us. All right, let's see what it's doing. There's a rest. Oh, it put in an, looks like it put in a URL for us. Remember, we want to get currency. Now, in our case, what we want to do is get rate and currency, but I don't know what this is doing. So we know that it's getting the data from this. Let's take a look at that data. Okay, that's a pretty highly structured piece of JSON. Can you see it very well? Let me see if I can hone in on that. We really want to get currency and rate. We don't care about any of this other stuff. You guys have ever coded, I don't know, bash JQ. I know how you really do it in Python, but that's some coding, right? Go back down. Now, I don't know what this guy's doing. Let's see what that put here. Yeah. It's getting some other data we don't want. So now what we're going to do is take this guy apart. Come on. Come on. There we go. I'm going to move this guy over here. And it has this thing called Iris that kind of knew what I wanted to do. I didn't have to tell it. So what we want to do is split this JSON right at those data elements. So there's a JSON splitter. So I'm going to click on that. But again, I don't like the code. So what I'm going to do is click on this guy. And I'm going to hit this bubble, and it's showing me the structure. How good is that? I know I'm going to get this guy, so I'm going to click on that array. That gives me the element. Oh, elements. Save that. Now the mapper is going to fail, and that's okay. So we're going to fix that. Come on. Come on, go down. Seriously? There we go. All right, so now to map those two guys, or do we even have to map them? Well, yes, we do, because they have @ signs in them. I don't know if you can see that, the little @ signs. So we're going to remove this mapping here. And this is how easy it is. Now, this is only 2 columns. Imagine if there's 40. And all I have to do is just, oops, come on. Let's grab this and drag it in, and voila. Now, in this case, we have an @ sign currency. If it was just currency, we wouldn't even have to do this. But since it has an @ sign, we're going to just bring this guy over. Come on. Come on. Bring this guy over here. And come on, currency. I did paste. There we go. And I'm just going to type in $rate here. Save that. Let it do its validation. We'll look at our data. Where's the plus sign? And there it is. We have our currency. We have our rate, all in the right format. And then, of course, the rest you know, because the rest of it is the JSON lines. Now, what's interesting is, let's say that we don't want it in JSON. Let's say that we want it in, come on. Let's say we want it in CSV. So we would go to the snaps, go to the CSV formatter. Voila, now it's in CSV format. In fact, I'll prove it. Disable, and we'll run a validate. Okay, let's take a look. It should let us look at it, even though it's binary. Yep. And there it is. All set for a spreadsheet. But let's say that you wanted to just have it go directly to an Excel spreadsheet. No problem. There is a snap for that. So we would go to snaps, type in Excel properly. Oh, good Lord, what's going on here? EXS, yeah, there we go. Excel formatter, same thing. Then you could use your file writer. Let's say you want to do a CSV instead, or let's just keep it with the Excel, right? Now, we're happy with our pipeline. Sorry with my inability to use a pad here. Let's get rid of these guys. Delete, delete. We have exactly what we want. And our department is very strict on documentation. So what we're going to do is say, describe this pipeline. I'm going to move this over. Take it from here. Thank you. It's analyzing the pipeline right now. I'm going to try to make this bigger and scroll down. I know that's, oh my gosh. All right. If you have binoculars. But what this is saying is, I really like the way it describes it too. This pipeline fetches the latest exchange rates from the European Central Bank. How to figure that out? Processes the data, saves it to a file, retrieves XML data from the ECB, European Central Bank, converts it to JSON, extracts specific currency and rate. Yeah, it knew that. Formats in Excel, and finally writes it to the data to a file. And then it goes through each one of those and describes exactly what it did. Makes documentation super easy. So oh my gosh, talk about on time. So I have just one more slide. Come on. Here we go. And am I going backwards? I'm going backwards. We have to start over. And there we go. So this is what we've gone over. You know about the enterprise data warehouse. You know how our design principles, the Snaplogic architecture, and you've seen a demonstration of 3 different pipelines. Are you worn out? Worn out. So thank you very much for coming. If you have any questions, thank you. If you have any questions, please let me know. I know it's 2 o'clock.